All right, hello, welcome back. Chase Thomas Podcast, taping this on a Wednesday afternoon. Jason Scheer is here, the authority on all things Arizona Wildcats, wildcatauthority.com himself. Jason, good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for being here. I know this is going to be kind of weird. Like I'm 32 now, Jason. I've grown up with a lot of bad Arizona football. I've seen a lot. There just haven't been a lot of Trung candidates out there in my lifetime. There aren't a lot of those guys. And you go back through the history of Arizona football, and look, you have some legends like the Brewskis of the world, but by and large, it's never been a premier top of the line football program. Baseball, basketball, electric, year over year. That's what they're known for. But I think, and please, you know this more than myself. You're more plugged in here. It's funny because when I was prepping for this, and I've been thinking about the Pac-12 and where things stand and what happened last year. Jedd Fisch was like a hire that I was pretty dubious of. Like I understood, like get the NFL guy. He's gonna get the NIL stuff. He's gonna get the ex-NFL guys. It's gonna be a different kind of thing entirely. And I could maybe see how you do it. And you just take a shot. Like Jedd Fisch, like why not? Just take a shot. It's Arizona football. What do you have to lose? And now I'm looking at it and I'm thinking about where the Pac-12 is right now, where Arizona is coming into this year. And I'm pretty optimistic. And I feel weird to be this optimistic that I think Jedd Fisch might actually pull this off in terms of getting this to be a stable, pretty solid to good football program year over year. Is that where you're at right now? Or are you telling fans, let's give it a couple more years and see where he gets to this point?
No, I'm at the same place. I probably had the same reaction. You probably had the same reaction as most people, which is, Jedd Fisch, like this is the hire. Like it kind of came out of nowhere a little bit, and and you're wondering how it's going to work because he had never been a head coach. He had only been a coordinator for a certain amount of years. Usually he's some sort of assistant, but his approach at Arizona has been the right one, which is basically recruit your butt off. And that's the only way you're going to win here. And, we talk about it's I got to admit the standards were kind of low because Kevin Sumlin had destroyed the program basically, that it's like, okay, if he comes in and if Jedd comes in and does relatively well, it's going to take a while. But we're year 3, and I think the expectation is that Arizona makes a bowl game, which is wild to say because it only feels like it was only a few years ago where they were losing their last game of the season to ASU 70-7. And the way that he's built the roster and the way that he's approached things, I think it's okay to be optimistic, which, like you mentioned, it sounds weird regarding Arizona football, but it feels like the right move to be optimistic and to think that this thing is turning around.
Absolutely. I wondered for the longest where I was like, oh man, did Rich Rod and Arizona not know what they had in each other? Like they should have just stayed together for the long haul until Rich Rod wanted to retire. Just look, this is going to keep humming. You have an identity. This is cool. But like you said, what Jedd Fisch is actually turning heads for is, recruiting, hitting the portal, like even losing important guys in the portal and being able to rebound from that, because I think that's just going to be a part of the deal with USC and just the nature of college football in 2023. Getting picked off a little bit year over year, but I'm pleasantly optimistic about where they're going. But speaking of new faces and what's going on there, the most important new face on this Arizona football roster is who for the fans?
For me, there's a lot of guys on the defensive side of the ball, but I think it's Justin Flowe, and linebacker transfer from Oregon. When he was in high school, he was about as good of a linebacker prospect in the last decade, at least. He was an absolute monster. Goes to Oregon, doesn't really catch on, gets hurt. Just had struggles kind of setting him back. He's healthy now. He looked great in spring. And if he's anywhere close to the prospect he was in high school, he'll change Arizona's defense considerably because they did not have a guy like him at linebacker. last season. Jacob Monty was a freshman, and he's good, really solid player. But Flowe is just a different kind of animal when you see his athleticism, size, and speed and all that. So if he stays healthy, I think he's the guy that, Arizona fans are going to know pretty much right away.
Offensively, who is it?
Offensively, Arizona didn't really add anyone new very much, which is nice. I mean, they lost some guys. To me, I think that the national name is going to be Jonas Savanea. He's the guy to me, where offensive lineman. They moved him from guard to tackle, and you would never know that he's never played tackle in his life. He's that good. He's an NFL player. I think he becomes more of a national name this year. To me, there's only a couple, if that, better linemen in the conference. And when it's all said and done, he's probably a first-round draft pick.
Left or right side?
He'll be on the right side.
Okay. Interesting. Did he grow? Like, what are his measurables? Why was he inside and then flipped outside later?
So basically what happened was there were some departures, and they basically said, in the transfer portal, they went after a couple guys. They didn't land him. They said, hey, do you want to try tackle? He said, sure. And then right away, he was awesome. And so what it does is it allows for some position flexibility. They have a freshman coming in named Raymond Polito, who's a 4-star guard. Maybe he catches on. But it allows some flexibility with the offensive line, and he was just the best available, and they were fine with moving him.
I like it. Who was the biggest loss from a season ago on this team? Who is going to hurt the most in 2023?
To me, it's tough to say, but at the defensive side of the ball, I think that anytime you lose a guy like Christian Roland Wallace, who transferred to USC, and I like Arizona's cornerback depth, but I think they're missing that veteran guy now. The position group is super young. They're starting a freshman named Ephesians Prysock, great name. But he played very little as a freshman, and now he's starting. They don't have that veteran leadership. And while, Roland Wallace was inconsistent, to me, he's the guy that could have added some veteran leadership for the younger guys. And, losing him and losing him in conference, I think, was probably, I would say, the worst look, the biggest loss. It's not one that they're, decimated by, but it would have been nice to have him on the roster.
Yeah, it giveth, the portal giveth and taketh, where it's like it's weird and it kind of sucks. Like you benefited, like Justin Flowe transferring in conference, and he's healthy and could be a big time player. But then it's also you lose a guy in conference to a rival, and it seems like that's something you don't want to see every year if you're an Arizona fan. Where it's like, are we really going to lose one of our most important players to USC just once a year? Like, is that just going to be the thing? How do you even stop that if you're Jedd Fisch in Arizona? Is there a way to curb it?
I honestly don't think there is, because if you're Arizona, Arizona has a really nice NIL program, especially for a school like Arizona. Jedd Fisch has done a great job. But at the end of the day, if USC wants to pay more than Arizona, they're going to be able to pay more than Arizona. And so if that's what it comes down to, there's only so much Arizona can do. Now, to their credit, they've also kept guys. I mean, Dora McMillan is one of the best wide receivers in the country. They were able to keep him. And so Jordan Morgan is a future first round, second round NFL draft pick on the offensive line. They were able to keep him. And so I think Arizona has the right approach. And basically, we lost Roland Wallace to you. They lost Roland Wallace, Keon Bars, and Dorian Singer all to USC.
Yeah.
And so, but they went out and they replaced these guys. They land a guy like Justin Flowe. They land a guy like, Daniel Himuli from Washington. They just landed, Bill Norton from Georgia. So they land guys in the portal, and that's the biggest thing. It's not necessarily keeping all these guys. It's kind of how do I replace them once they leave.
Is Jayden De Laura the most underrated in the Pac-12 super elite quarterback rankings? Where does he fall? Because, when you look at just where the Pac-12 is as a whole and the QB front, it's kind of unbelievable how every Saturday, like if the good folks all across the country right now are not staying up late to watch Pac-12 football this fall, like I don't know what you're doing, because you're going to get elite quarterback play all across the board. When like DJ Uiagalelei might be one of the worst quarterbacks in the conference, something is going really right for your conference. And he had a really good year last year, and obviously another Pac-12 in conference transfer. But is it him? Is he still going to be the guy for the full year? Like, where does he also, based on what you've seen, where does he fall in the hierarchy of Pac-12 elite quarterbacks?
Yeah, like I want to say he's underrated because I've seen the preseason publications and I think he's low, but I also get it because, like you mentioned, the conference is loaded at quarterback. Yeah. And so it's, I think he's kind of in the middle with the ability to move up a little bit. I definitely don't think he's towards the bottom. He's pretty entrenched as a starter. There's room for him to improve. He's got to be able to cut down on the turnovers where, he had multiple where he's running around for 30 seconds and then he just throws the ball downfield and it's picked off or something like that. And he, that to his credit, that's something that he's focused on. Jedd Fisch has brought it up a lot. He looked really good in the spring, but it's a situation where I like him. I think he's legitimately good, but a lot of it's also the system. I think Jedd Fisch's system is really good for quarterbacks. Like, I don't know how well Jayden De Laura would do on another team in the Pac-12. I think that he's found a nice fit with the system and all that. And it's tough ranking these quarterbacks. I mean, like you mentioned, DJ, like he wasn't great at Clemson, but for all we know, in the Pac-12, he goes to Oregon State and he's awesome. Yeah. And the fact that we don't know that right now, we'd probably have him a little bit lower is kind of crazy to say.
Yeah, I mean, UCLA might start true freshman Dante Moore. It might be the Kent State kid, Colin Schlee or whatever. But like Stanford, they always have the surprising random okay quarterback. Like, we'll see if it's going to be a very different situation with Taylor running things. But I don't know. I just feel like you're going to have elite quarterback play all across the board, and I don't know where he falls, but it's somewhere in the middle. I think when you put him in the lower end, I think you're not watching enough Arizona football. And I like their Jacob Cowling, like you talked about, McMillan, there's just a lot of weapons with this Arizona offense that I think a bowl game is actually kind of the low end of what they could be. What was the biggest hire that Jedd Fisch has nailed to this point, and what has been the biggest question mark hire for him to this point?
The hire that I like was the most surprising one, and that is Scotty Graham at running backs coach. He had never coached before. He was an admin at ASU, and when Jedd Fisch hired him, there were a lot of questions because it's a running back, you're putting together a great staff and all that. But Scotty, he's never coached before. Scotty Graham is a great dude, great recruiter, and great coach. I mean, he has been an absolute home run. The running back group is really strong. They all love him. He knows what he's doing. And to me, that was a home run and a hire that a lot of people, I was caught off guard by it. Other people were caught off guard because he just hadn't coached before. And when you talk to him, it's no wonder why the players love him. He has NFL experience, and the guy never fumbled in his life. So when a player fumbles, it's you look to the sideline automatically, like, all right, what's Scotty gonna do? I think the biggest question for a hire right now, until it's successful, is defensive coordinator. And I like Johnny Nansen, but the thing was, Jedd Fisch hired Don Brown. And he was here a year before he went to UMass. And so, it's should he have hired Don Brown in the first place if he knew that Don Brown was going to leave for a head coaching job, because the defense needed to be rebuilt completely. And they weren't great. And then he hires Johnny Nansen, and the defense was awful last year. And so I think the defense will be better this season, but there's no doubt that when you're looking at the coaching staff, Johnny Nansen is the guy with the biggest question mark above his name.
Yeah, because he comes from UCLA and he's been all over the West Coast. But yeah, that just feels like, I don't know. Like you mentioned with Don Brown, like that was just such a weird thing to accept anyway. Like UMass, that's a tough job, man. And he's not a young guy. That's not a young man. That's not an older coach's job, I don't think. Like that's a long-term rebuild. That's like, hey, I don't know, man. It's kind of, I guess you want to run your own program and hope for the best. But like Arizona felt like the perfect kind of retirement. Like he did the Michigan stuff, cold weather, getting away from that. I'm going to Arizona for my last 5 to 10 coaching years, whatever it is, as the DC here for the Cats. I don't think I can fault Jedd Fisch for bringing Don on. And I mean, I'm sure he was probably perplexed by the acceptance to UMass, but I don't know. Do you think he makes it through? Is there enough talent on this defense that makes you believe that Nansen is the DC at this time next year, or do you think they end up having to make a change because the defense is still awful back-to-back years?
I think the defense will be better, and Jedd Fisch seems to be patient. I don't think anyone's expected the defense to be really good all of a sudden, but if it can be average, I know that sounds crazy, but that's probably the goal, like to be average. If Arizona had an average defense last season, it's in a bowl game. If they have an average defense this season, it's probably in a bowl game. If Arizona's defense is bad, Nansen's gone. There's just no way you can keep him. You've given him what he's wanted in terms of talent, transfer portal. He's had a big say in the players coming in. This defense, personnel-wise, looks more like what he wants than it did last season. And so you give him that chance and you see how he does. I think he can make it through, but it's kind of the general belief is I'll believe it when I see it, and that's fair with him.
I like it. You mentioned NIL, and I was always curious. With I'm familiar with obviously being here in UT with Spire and company, and just how things work here. But like in the Arizona front, you mentioned that they have a strong NIL program. Like, where do they rank among the Pac-12 in terms of their NIL for football? Just is because I think a lot, I'm sure, nationally, and college football fans or just college sports fans think Arizona. And it's like, yeah, we could see good time NIL. Like Tommy Lloyd obviously doing a fantastic job. That was a big hire, killing it in the portal and then just recruiting as a whole. And then baseball, bringing in was it not Chip Hale? Was it Chip Hale? Chip Hale, right? Yeah. Okay. I was saying that and I was like, that doesn't sound right in my head. Okay. Yeah. Chip Hale. And don't like that they beat Tennessee to start this actual year. That was a bad omen early on. All that being said, you just think that's just kind of where the NIL money would go, or maybe that's the priority. Where does football fall in among the big three, and then where does the football NIL program rank compared to the rest of the Pac-12 right now?
Yeah, I think Jedd Fisch has done a really good job. He is super aggressive at raising money. He's by far the most aggressive coach, on campus. Tommy Lloyd puts in work towards raising money and all that, but Jedd will hold events just for that. He'll call boosters. He will absolutely make phone calls on his own, and he's done a really nice job. It's still not good enough, and that's kind of what he always says. And I know recently he had a big alumni thing in Los Angeles where he basically said it's just not good enough right now because other schools are like USC and Oregon. Those schools are getting bigger and bigger with their NIL, and it's basically Arizona kind of has to. Now you're not going to pass those schools, but you're kind of trying to stay close to them. I would say it's probably the middle of the conference. I think if Arizona needs to make certain payments or raise enough money for certain players, it can, but you're not going to see a situation. I know guys in the portal that have basically Arizona's reached out to them and they've dropped them within seconds because they find out how much the kid wants, and there's just wet. And so they've done a pretty good job getting kids, and there's other ways that they get kids on campus, but I would say probably middle of the line in the Pac-12.
Interesting. Are they ahead of Arizona State right now?
Yes, absolutely. And I would say they're ahead of Arizona State. They're ahead of like the Oregon State or Washington State. It's the UCLA, USC's, and Oregon's. They're probably not going to pass. They're very organized on the football end, and there's a couple groups that do it. They're organized. Jedd Fisch does a nice job. ASU was kind of disorganized at first. Now they've got them organized, and Kenny Dillingham is going to raise money there. So I'm sure that gap will narrow at between ASU and Arizona. But right now, I think Arizona's in a better situation NIL-wise.
What is Jedd, do you think? I'm not sure if you've ever asked him about this, but like, is this a destination job for him? Do you think he's here for the long haul? Do you think he's invested? If like Chip took an NFL job or something and UCLA opened up, or I mean, what does he strike? Like, we're entering year 3. He's getting this program off the ground. Does he strike you as someone who will stick around for the long haul to this point?
In a nice way, not at all. and that's not a knock on Jedd, but like if you look at his career, a lot of times when he's successful, he'll go on to another spot. And It's smart. I mean, when a lot of guys stay at spots too long, but like I can tell you right now, and I don't think this is a secret. If Chip leaves UCLA and they call Jedd Fisch and they offer him the job, there's no conversation. Jedd's going back to LA. I mean, it's just that's where his roots are. His wife loves it. I think there's a legit chance if Arizona goes to a bowl this year and he gets an offer from a bigger school that he's gone. Now, that's not a knock on Arizona, but it's just I don't see him as a guy that's going to be coaching at Arizona for 10 years. I could be wrong, but it's just a situation where Arizona can also only pay so much. They've given Jedd everything he wants in terms of facilities, admin, staff, and all that. But again, it's similar to NIL. If UCLA comes and offers Jedd Fisch $5 million a year, Arizona's not doing that. It's just not happening.
Who's the dream Arizona hire for fans if he leaves? Like, who's the one that they've always just kind of been like, this is the one we want, if it's not Jedd Fisch?
I don't know. It's a good question. I think people just want, you always have a group that want alumni, but there's no real alumni out there. I think people just want a guy that they could count on to win some football games and love Tucson. Like you mentioned Tommy Lloyd with basketball, he has embraced Tucson.
Yeah.
And that's the key here is that Kevin Sumlin didn't win, but he also wasn't seen out in the community. He didn't embrace the city. And when he made that decision, he was done before he even coached a game in this town. You have to be vocal. You have to be visible. Jedd Fisch has done a great job with that. So whoever would replace him, if that happens, needs to do the same. Needs to be visible in the town. And yeah, you need to win some games, but you get a longer leash here when you're visible in the city.
I like it. Final question here. I don't know if you're going to be able to answer this one. I'm putting you on the spot. Is Arizona in the Pac-12 or the Big 12 this time next year, Jason?
Oh, man. My gut tells me the Pac-12. I think that there's a way. I don't know if it'll be a good deal, but I think there's a way they find a path to keeping the conference together. I mean, I'll be honest, it could change tomorrow. I said Big 12 before. It feels like it's a fluid situation, but we're at a point. I don't know where the deal's coming from or any of that, but at the end of the day.
Do you think it's all streaming or no?
Huh?
Do you think it's going to be all streaming? Do you think Apple
not all streaming, but I think it's going to be heavy streaming. I would be surprised if it's like ESPN and that's it. I think it's going to be heavy streaming, and then from there you'll kind of see a breakaway with games.
That's interesting. I mean, do you see SMU and San Diego State ultimately filling that void, and they just piece it together and see what it looks like 3 to 5 years and then revisit?
SMU, I'm a little bit questionable on. I'm not sure they're guaranteed to get added. San Diego State is a lock. I think once they get a deal if they get a deal, it'll be San Diego State rather quickly. I don't think it's going to be super long. I think where we're headed is, I think the Big Ten contract ends in 2030. College football is going to heck in 2030. Like, you're going to see a bunch of realignment. No one's going to sign a contract longer than that. And you're going to see a complete, I don't want to say breakup of college football, but you're going to see divisions and things like that. I think it's going to change dramatically in about 5 years.
It's funny because, like, my prediction is that I think college football, it's like the tech bros who just reinvent things that already existed, like with cable. Like, we're making cable far more complicated than it used to be. We're just now getting to the point where it's like it's cheaper to stream, and it's like, well, now it's just the exact same, and it's just more complicated to do the thing that I wanted to do anyway. What it feels like it's going to happen when the ACC is able to get out of their grant of rights, and the Pac-12 will see what happens there. I think what's going to end up happening is you're going to have like 64, 68 teams all in this Power 1 super, like maybe Power 2 super conference like the NFL. But then I think they're going to break it up like the Pac-12 division, the Big 12 division, and they're just going to have like basically the conferences that we grew up with in those two conferences, the ones that survive. Like, I don't know if Washington State and Oregon State make that jump, but I think that's where we end up. It's like we reinvented the same conferences that we have, because like there's just no path to UCLA and USC being the only West Coast team in the Big Ten and then having to do that schedule and that travel year over year by themselves. Like, that's not sustainable. They're not doing that. They all know that when they jumped in the boat, like, this was not going to be the final two West Coast teams. I was surprised that Cal and Stanford weren't required. They just felt like an obvious Big Ten, and not to beat up on Cal and Stanford, but with that kind of schedule, you want to have some games on the West Coast that you feel good about on your schedule. I don't know. I just do you get the same sense where like I just think ultimately we're just going to reinvent, like we're going to have the ACC conference in the SEC, or ACC division in the SEC, and then the SEC division in the SEC, and we have all of them, and everything else breaks away. That's what I see it.
Yeah, I mean that wouldn't surprise me at all. And it's like people talk about like the death of the Pac-12. The Pac-12 is not going anywhere. It's just going to look super different. And that's it. And even the ACC, when these schools get out, they'll find a way to add other schools.
Yeah.
So it's just going to look super different. And I do think that that's where we're headed. The big divisions, and it still looks similar because you're still going regional and all that. You're still playing the same teams that you pretty much always played, or similar to that. And then it'll look different, but at the end, to its core, it'll be pretty similar to what it was before.
Yeah, and I think the only thing that you'll miss is because you have all these TV execs running these conferences, the buy-in games are gone. Like that, you just can't sell them anymore. Like we cannot put these on TV. We can't do 3 nobody cares about Oregon games. Like we can't burn these games on this. Like we can't supplement those schools, and it sucks because it helps those programs and everything else. But that's going to be a rough loss, I think, for college football, and the haves and the have-nots. But I also just feel like that's where things are headed. Is you're not going to have them, and you're just going to have 12 good to great games week over week, because they're like, the NFL doesn't do that. We don't just do week 1 the New York Giants versus like the German or like some XFL team. Like we're not doing that. Like why would we burn multiple weeks of content on our broadcast for that? Like I don't see a bunch of TV executives who run these conferences agreeing to that anymore.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I would be pretty nervous if I was a smaller school athletic department. I mean, it's you need football financially to survive, and we're at a point, like you mentioned, like what's the point of Alabama versus some random school where they're going to win 70-0 when you could, you have college football looking completely different, and you're going big game after big game after big game. Those schools that rely on the $500,000 check to go and get their butt kicked to keep their athletic department alive, those schools are the ones that are going to suffer. And I think we're going to see a lot more athletic departments shut down here, or at least football programs and all that, in the next 5 years or so.
Yeah. I mean, I think you go from Alabama versus Citadel to Alabama versus Oregon State, where they're like, or whoever, somebody like insert Pac-12, like better matchups, I think, for the fans all across the board. But yeah, it's crazy times in college football. But I could talk about realignment and all this all day with you, Jason. But I appreciate you taking the time. What can the good folks check out from you over at wildcatauthority.com this week?
Yeah, so we're heavy into basketball. We're into football recruiting right now. Jedd Fisch has gotten 10 football commits this week, so it's been wild. But wildcatauthority.com, at Jason Scheer on Twitter are the 2 places to check out our content.
There you go. Yeah, isn't it weird? Like in college football now, like recruiting's basically done in August. Like this is the early signing period. It's just you have to be locked in over the next couple of weeks, because your whole class might be just about done before the senior season for a lot of these kids even starts. It's a wild, different time. Jason, thank you so much for making the time. I greatly appreciate it, and we'll have to check back in again soon.
Thanks for.
Well done, nephew. Chase Thomas Podcast. Hell yeah.